We're talking about Tropical Storm Irma now, but if you go back 1 week, it was a Category 5 hurricane. Winds of 185 miles an hour moving through the northern islands of the Caribbean, then across the coast of Cuba this weekend, and then making a quick turn heading northward across Florida. Right behind it, that is Jose, still a hurricane. Here's the history on radar back to Sunday morning. Key West took the eye wall first. Most of the track of Irma was more toward the west coast of Florida than the east coast, but as it moved over Marco Island, winds gusting to over 140 miles an hour. Look at those feeder bands on the east coast of Florida Sunday afternoon. Everything shifting toward the northward and then gradually losing strength. The reason it lost strength partly was due to the fact that so much of the center part stayed over land. But it is a broad system as of late afternoon with rain across Alabama, but still the threatening weather more so to the east. I'll show you that in just a moment. As of late afternoon on this Monday, tropical storm. Winds of about 50 miles an hour close to Albany, Georgia. The forecast track takes it across into northern Alabama as a weakening system. Overnight, likely losing tropical storm status with maximum winds between 35 and 40 miles an hour, but mostly as a rainstorm going into western Tennessee, southern Illinois, where it will linger for a couple of days. Now here's one computer projection showing the motion, showing how it's still a broad system, and there's the rain ahead of it. Notice the brighter colors along the coastline. That is still the threat of feeder bands hitting South Carolina coast, North Carolina coast, as the rest of the north central Gulf Coast sees the wind shifting from north more toward the southwest. Latest update on the tropical storm warnings. Still some tropical storm warnings offshore for the central part of the Florida Panhandle, but now basically eastern Alabama, most of Georgia, and the coastline of South Carolina. Based on the wind circulating around Tropical Storm Irma, still pushing water against the coast in the northwestern Florida peninsula. The storm surge warning continues there as well as along the Georgia coast and the South Carolina coast. And those locations are still the most likely spots to see active weather. Feeder bands moving on shore, bringing the threat of tornadoes, so a tornado watch in that part of the southeast. There's the rain, again, as of late afternoon. The center of the circulation moving in southwest Georgia. The brighter colors showing the heavier rain through Atlanta back toward Birmingham, Alabama. All of that will shift to the north. But notice along the coastline of South Carolina, it's not that solid bright color. It's little isolated areas of red. Those are individual thunderstorms, which could produce tornadoes. And a tornado could produce winds easily over 100, 120, 150 miles an hour. So even though it's a tropical storm, it still has threats. Bring it back to the Mobile Bay area, the News 5 area. A northerly breeze is what we've had all day with winds gusting 30 to 35 miles an hour. And keep in mind that north wind blowing across a bay like Mobile Bay, which is actually very shallow, produces a scene like this, a live view as of late afternoon. You're seeing land, water, Mobile Bayway, Interstate 10 bridge, traffic trying to head back into Florida. Well, it turns out that a north wind does push water away from the coast on the north central Gulf Coast. A live view at Orange Beach late afternoon. While the swells and the waves come in, the wind is blowing the water out. So the surf line is actually a little farther back than it would typically be. And notice the cumulus clouds, and in fact you can see the shadows of the clouds moving pretty quickly across the beach. And of course you can see some of the wind trying to push the water away. Many people were surprised to see pictures like this on Mobile Bay yesterday. That's Battleship Memorial Park. The battleship, by the way, it's not floating. It is anchored in the sand and anchored in the mud. But the northern part of Mobile Bay, whenever you have a steady north wind, the water gets pushed toward the central part of the bay and the southern part of the bay. Elizabeth Miller on the eastern shore of Mobile Bay in Montrose shot this picture. She said typically the water is about 2 feet deep. But of course, the wind pushed it away from the coastline. But you can almost see in the distance, you can see the whitecaps and the waves no more than a couple hundred yards offshore. So wind can push water onshore, wind can push water away from the shore. Let's talk about Jose. It's a hurricane. It's a Category 2 with 100-mile-an-hour winds, pretty far from the Bahamas, and it's showing no signs of strengthening, which is good, and it's moving northward, which is good. However, look at this forecast track, and the next 4 or 5 days, likely to loop around and then take a turn back toward the west, so that by the time we get closer to the weekend, it could still be a hurricane, and notice it could potentially impact the Bahamas. Just like I mentioned with Hurricane Irma, don't try to extend this any farther with your mind because it's the steering winds that will control where this is. So don't assume it's going to keep going to the west. It may turn back. It may actually fade before it gets to that point. We are in the peak of hurricane season. We've just seen a couple of major hurricanes move close to the Caribbean, the southern Bahamas, tropical disturbances out to the east. But just keep in mind, just keep watching, keep updated, make sure, in the best case, you have a plan for yourself, your family, your friends, and your pets. I'm Chief Meteorologist Alan Seals.